November 1988. Palace of Justice, Pretoria. After 3.5 years, Judgment Day. In this, the longest-running political trial in South Africa's history. Delivering his 6-volume, 1,521-page judgment, Judge Kees van Dykhorst acquits 11 of the 22 accused of treason in the so-named Delmas Treason Trial. Handing down sentence 3 weeks later, the judge gives 6 of the 11 found guilty suspended sentences. Of the remaining 5, the 3 UDF leaders Popo Molefe, Mos Chikani and Terra Lakota are sentenced to 10, 10 and 12 years respectively. South African Council of Churches fieldworker Tom Mantata is given 6 years, while Vaal Civic Association youth leader Tina Malindi receives a 5-year sentence. Emotions run high as a final prophetic message of hope from those convicted is read to the court. Somewhere in the future lies a date when black and white will take a second look at these moments of our history. Outside, 15-year-old Masichaba Lakota weeps at the prospect of her father going back to Robben Island.
There was a picture of her in the front page of the Star, where she was standing at the corner of the street crying alone there. That's something that stayed with me, and I think it was some experience for my daughter.
Masichaba does not weep alone. Inside the courtroom, tears stream down the cheeks of veteran advocate for the defense, George Bezos. Judge van Dykhorst, on the other hand, seems not quite so moved.
The judge, obviously having seen me in tears, he said, "But cowboys don't cry, do they?" I uttered in a stage whisper for him to hear, "I've never wanted to be a good cowboy."
For George, it's a poignant moment, sharing as he does the bittersweet secret of an undisclosed love affair between accused Gina Malindi and defense attorney Caroline Nichols, who at the time of sentencing is about to give birth to their baby daughter, Lindiwe.
Malindi's child was born on the very same day that my first grandchild was born.
George is the person that she went to first to say, Gina and I are involved, and in addition, I'm pregnant.
You know, for an attorney to fall in love with one of the accused and have a child. And I became the godfather of Lindiwe, the daughter, their first daughter. So for me, it was an emotional thing. I make no secret of it.
This is Delmas, situated off the beaten track some 70 kilometers east of Johannesburg. Out of sight, out of mind was definitely the thinking by the authorities for this choice. It was here on the 16th of October 1985 that the Delmas Treason Trial began, in the magistrates' court of this small-town, predominantly Afrikaner farming community that would ultimately give its name to this extraordinary chapter of South African history. The events that precipitated the trial began some distance from Delmas, a few years earlier. In August 1983, the United Democratic Front was launched in direct opposition to the government's so-called new constitution. This new constitution was designed to entice coloureds and Indians, offering them limited rights in a new 2-tiered tricameral parliament. In addition, black local authorities, under the control of puppet black councillors, would run the lives of those blacks permitted to reside in the townships.
That is the first and primary reason why we reject the Constitution Act. We reject it, as I have already said, because it entrenches our party.
This would effectively create a buffer of 1 or 2 million complicit coloureds, Indians and urban blacks between white South Africa and the black majority.
Now it disturbs me when people
At the same time, the government would resolutely complete its Bantustan policy. designed to strip the black majority of all citizenship and political rights in 86% of South Africa. This trade-off was the essence of the new constitution. Within a year, the UDF had mobilized a groundswell of grassroots opposition across the country.
It was an all-round mobilization of all institutions, all organizations, because we wanted really the opposition to the constitutional program to be the opposition by the masses of our people. We had been holding meetings, talking to people about the implementation of the program of the United Democratic Front, which was to render constitutional proposals unworkable.
Tumahola, black township outside the conservative Free State town of Parys, scene of the first spark to ignite resistance to the oppressive consequences of the new constitution. On July 1st, 1984, rent increases are instituted on an already destitute community by the black councillors. Supported by the UDF, the Tumahola Students' Organization mobilized the community to march in protest. The march begins in an area subsequently dubbed Beirut. Away with councillors, away with rent increases, are the placards carried in peaceful protest that day. Confronted by police firing tear gas, the marchers flee for their lives and the mood changes. A supermarket, funeral parlor and butchery, all belonging to privileged black councillors, are looted and burned. Accused number 20, Publicity Secretary of the UDF, Terra Lakota, on his way to the protest, is detained by police at a roadblock at the entrance to the township.
So when I ultimately arrived late in the day, the march had already been disrupted by the police, and in fact, there had been, for the better part of the afternoon, there had been running battles between the police and the youth. Once at Tumahola, this had happened in Tumahola, and there were rentals and other problems in the Vaal, or just over the river. It spread that way, but Tumahola was really the spark.
Across the Vaal River on the 12th of August, Father Jeff Masalani, accused number 3, organizes a meeting at St. Cyprian's Anglican Church for the community of Sharpeville to discuss their opposition to the rent increases. The Sharpeville community are largely destitute, and Father Masalani is active in organizing emergency relief and community gardening schemes in the grounds of his parish.
More people were asking for food parcels, and then I saw that, how about us coming to talk about what affects them? But then other people, their friends, heard that there's this whole thing about talking about rentals from the other churches, from the community, who decided to come and join us here in the meetings.
A week later, Father Masalani invites South African Council of Churches field worker Tom Mantata, accused number 16, to address a follow-up meeting.
To tell you in no uncertain terms that defense will always be there for you.
I got into the Vaal on the invitation by Jeff Masalani, that is the rector of St. Cyprian Anglican Church. He was dishing out food parcels to older persons who were subsisting exclusively on their pension.
By the 26th of August, the community of Sharpeville have resolved not to pay the increase in rents and to get legal assistance via the South African Council of Churches to take the Lakoa Black Local Authority to court.
I was not interested in a march. I was interested in taking the Lakoa Town Council to court. What motivated me was the whole issue of that social responsibility of the church, that we as priests will have to see to the needs, address the needs of people. And I saw that it was not political, but kind of church-related. Preaching to them and not giving them anything was contrary to the gospel.
We must test that. That's right.
That same day, two other communities, meeting at St. Michael's Church in Boipatong and here at the Small Farms Roman Catholic Church in Everton, take similar decisions. In addition, a stay-away and protest march is planned for Monday, the 3rd of September. Gina Malindi, Vaal Youth Leader and accused number 5, is one of the coordinators of the march that set out from Small Farms Catholic Church on the morning of Monday, the 3rd of September, 1984.
It was a huge meeting. A lot of us had not expected such support. And after the people were addressed at this meeting, then the march started.
But resentment by the community at increased oppression brought about by the complicity of black councillors was already erupting in violence. As the march entered Sebokeng, on the road ahead, a councillor's house was already in flames.
We then had to take a decision whether we call off the march at that point or whether we proceed. And the decision that was taken was that we should proceed with the march, because if we called it off, it could be said that we only intended to lead it up to Zone 11 to kill a councillor and then disperse.
Dispersed by police, the marchers never reached their intended destination. Across the way, Sharpeville and Boipatong erupted in bloody violence. Businesses and homes of councillors were attacked and set on fire. As the Vaal erupted, 5 councillors lost their lives. Father Masalani was not in Sharpeville that day. He was attending the Anglican Church Synod in Johannesburg. On hearing the news, he rushed back to the township.
Tires were burning. There was just lots of chaos. People were running around. And I heard that when I arrived here, that Mr. Dlamini, the late Dlamini, was one of the councillors, has been killed. And some of them who were here have left the township. It was very sad to see that people can kill each other out of a system that they didn't create.
In the months that followed, security forces threw armed cordons around townships countrywide. A state of emergency followed. The final phase of the revolution against apartheid oppression had begun. South Africa was never the same again.
The 3rd of September was the spark of the beginning of the end of the apartheid regime.
With the state of emergency firmly in place, the regime set about building its case against the UDF. 3 members of the leadership were arrested, as well as 18 activists and 1 priest, all linked to events that took place in the Vaal during August and September 1984.
Actually, I remember the day when the police and soldiers came to our house and they took my dad away. You know, it was a cold winter's morning, and it was very early. We hadn't even woken up. You know, we heard noises outside.
Our youngest child, Kwitsi, was 8 months old. They started searching the house. The children woke up and found these strange men in their home, speaking in Afrikaans.
There were Caspers outside as well, and I couldn't understand what was going on. And they led us to my parents' room, and they were looking through some of his possessions, especially in his wardrobe. And I couldn't understand what they were looking for, you know? I think mainly they were looking for books. In retrospect, that's what I realized. But I couldn't understand why they were going through his cupboard looking for stuff. And we were just sent off to school afterwards, and it's just really, I never really understood what had happened.
They left with the house surrounded by police, and that was a painful thing. and not knowing when next they will be able to see their dead. And this was the beginning of the Delmas Treason Trial.
The Delmas Treason Trial commenced on the 16th of October 1985. The state's intention was to prove a conspiracy by the UDF to overthrow the government by violent revolution. In the process, they were determined to link key players and their organizations associated with the unrest of the 3rd of September as complicit in this conspiracy. The 22 accused faced charges of treason, subversion, terrorism, and murder.
We, the majority,
I must say that right from the beginning of the trial, as I said to the judge in the course of the case, I hadn't come to plead not guilty for fighting apartheid. I plead not guilty to treason, but I plead guilty to opposing apartheid.
The state built its case on the 9 public meetings held at churches in Boipatong, Sharpeville and Everton in the run-up to September the 3rd. For the accused, their very lives depended on interpretation by the judge as to whether or not they had incited violence when they addressed these meetings. The gravity of their situation was brought home early on, with the sentencing to death of the so-named Sharpeville Six in 1985. These were 6 people in the crowd found responsible for the mob murder of Sharpeville councillor Jacob Dlamini on September 3rd. They were sentenced to death under common purpose.
When the Sharpeville Six were given death sentence, and these were the people who were in the meeting that I addressed. Okay, I may not have known what is it they did during the march, or what is it they did in organizing the march. I may not even know whether they could have been party to the murders and so on. But the fact that I could have incited them, was itself a pointer, which actually, even made one feel that, if they go, why can't we go? If they can be given death sentence, how sure that we cannot be given death sentence either?
As the trial dragged on, at the end of every day, the accused were driven some 20 kilometers back to Modabi prison, where they were held on the outskirts of Benoni.
I never did understand why I would have to go see my dad at a prison. That just used to tick me off, especially because of the trip that it involved, and we didn't have a comfortable car. It was really a mission to get there. And, just going through the whole security check, everything, it really was a headache. And only to see him behind bars behind a glass pane and only speak to him through some sort of walkie-talkie device. It was really quite painful.
We just expressed our concern when he was coming out and, were they treating him right, He wasn't getting sick or anything. Because I remember he'd had a lot of encounters with the police and the system, before he actually went into prison. At marches like Regina Mundi, when he went to Regina Mundi once, he was assaulted by the police and he was whipped. And I'd always ask myself, whether he'd make it in there, whether he was built for prison.
What actually nearly broke me was when I learned that because I had left that house, not fenced and whatnot and so on, how difficult it was, in terms of security, at home, knowing exactly what was, what the security police were capable of.
I remember at some stage we got a bulletproof door at my house, as strange as it sounds, it really blew my mind. I was thinking, okay, why do we need to make contingencies with a bulletproof door?
I think it was difficult for them to take this as normal. They did see it as abnormal because children of their age would talk about their fathers being at home, doing this with daddy over the weekend. But with these, there was no father. As a result, they took my father to be their dad, much as they called him grandpa. But I know the youngest, Huitsi, really thought that my father was her father. To a point when I took her over once to visit Tom, the child just screamed. She just didn't know who this man was. and held on to my dad and said, Papa, you know, Tom was a stranger.
I did think he was dad, yes. He was the father figure at the time. Unlike Fenye and Kuma, they knew dad, I didn't. So instantly I thought he was my father.
Even at when they attended trials, you know, she would not come to me. Here is the daughter, you know, loved and getting that scared of a daddy who's the other side of the box. And, you know, you would say, by the time I come out, you know, will she ever remember? Or all what she will remember was, you know, this monster who was behind bars and so on.
When you look at your family collapsing, your marriage collapsing, going to the ruins, and you sitting there helplessly, not able to do anything, that was the law.
For Terra Lakota, a real low point in the trial was the 30th of April 1986. This was the day the state produced as damning witness Charlotte Tlale from Tumahola. Charlotte testified that Terra had met with students at her mother's Black Joint Tavern, instructed them on how to make petrol bombs, and encouraged them to seek revenge on sellout black councillors.
They brought this young lady. She was about 17 at the time. I had never seen her. I didn't know her. And she led evidence to the effect that somebody had come to Tumahola and taught them to make petrol bombs, and in fact instigated them to go and kill one of the councillors there, Mr. Tlalele, in fact, was it.
Unbeknown to the court, Charlotte had been detained in solitary confinement for some 18 months, and the security police had coerced her into making this charge. She had in fact never met Lakota. The security police showed her photographs and told her to ask the judge to instruct the accused seated on the bench to smile. She would then recognize Lakota by the characteristic gap between his two front teeth.
Then judge ka impotsa gore na Terra Lakota ha ga batho ba ba mo kaofela na ke a mtseba na.
Then the judge asked me whether I could identify Terra Lakota from the 22 accused seated in the courtroom. I asked the judge to instruct all of the accused to smile. I then identified Terra Lakota by his smile as the one who had done these things.
I must say that it was a very gloomy day because actually at the end of the day, George drew my attention to the fact that this was so serious, you know, that if this evidence was not disproved convincingly, and then I would find myself at the gallows.
In the shadow of the gallows, fortune smiled on Terra Lakota. Alone in her cell that night, Charlotte wrestled with her conscience. At great risk, the next day in court, she disclosed how she had been forced by the security police and leading prosecutor in the trial, Deputy Attorney General Mr. Jacobs, to fabricate this damning evidence. That night, I thought about how wrong this all was, and I told the court how I had been forced to say these things that were in fact not true.
And then she said, but everything that I've said about Mr. Lakota isn't the truth. They have put me up to this. Well, the judge was absolutely devastated.
In contrast, there were lighter and happier moments. In June 1986, accused number 4, Lazarus More, married his sweetheart, Golda Mafisa. The judge's bench served as the altar. His wife baked the two-tiered wedding cake. It was a gala affair. Archbishop Desmond Tutu and representative for the Archbishop of Canterbury, Terry Waite, were two on the guest list.
I was in love with Golda for quite some time, and we're then planning to get married. Then, unfortunately, I was then shot. I was then detained, and subsequently I was then charged with treason. And probably the best way for her and for myself to show this passion, the love, and the closeness was to celebrate our wedding on, during my trial. And it was very nice. And even the judge was there, to celebrate with me, to be part and parcel of that wedding.
On the 30th of June 1987, after 3 grueling years of detention, bail was finally granted to all, save the 3 UDF leaders Mos Chikani, Popo Malefe and Tera Lakota. It was a moment of bittersweet triumph in the trial. It was also farewell to Delmas. When the trial resumed some 6 weeks later, it was at the Palace of Justice in Pretoria. If the judge could, on occasion, be seen to be unusually harsh towards any one of the accused, it was to number 5, Gina Malindi.
During our attempts to go out on bail on one occasion, when the legal team approached the prosecutors and said, "But why are you keeping accused number 5? I mean, he's only done X, Y, Z. Give him bail." And they were told, no. Accused number 5 is one of those that we want the death penalty for.
In the dock, Gina was asked to relate a painful incident he had experienced as a young boy. It concerned his father. Because of the pass laws at the time, Gina's father was not permitted to be in Everton, where Gina was living with his mother. When inspectors banged on their door to save his father from arrest, Gina was forced to deny him, something that has remained with him ever since.
He actually had to deny that his father was his father when the inspectors came there and said, "Who is this?" And the mother was insisting that he was merely a visitor so that he wouldn't be arrested under the Urban Areas Act. And the inspector saw him, he was 9 years old then or something, and said, "Who is that?" Pointing to his father, and he said, "I don't know." And when he related that in the witness box, tears came down his eyes.
Seemingly the judge was not so moved, and in his judgment, somewhat caustically he wrote, "It is useful to sketch a profile of accused number 5. He is now 28 years old and grew up in a poor family in Everton, where his parents were residing illegally. They were consequently frequently arrested. He, number 5, still bears a grudge about it." With the state seeking the death penalty, Gina's case needed priority attention. In the latter half of 1987, Gina and defense lawyer Caroline Nichols were brought into a close working relationship. Caroline had long been friendly with accused number 13, Simon Nkodi, who was now experiencing homophobic reaction as his homosexuality became known to his fellow accused.
I said, "Who can I speak to that you really trust?" And he then said, "No, you must speak to Gina, because he's the only one who understands me and accepts me for what I am." I was sort of fascinated to find out why this guy who'd had exactly the same upbringing as everyone else, township upbringing, very poverty-stricken, had such enlightened views on Si's situation and on homosexuality and enlightened views on everything, and was so tolerant generally.
Her presence could not escape me. She was there, and it just struck me that she was there.
Unbeknown to all except Simon and George Bezos, out on bail, Gina and Caroline lived happily together as the trial trudged on through 1988. Their bliss was rudely shattered when, quite unexpectedly, the judge revoked bail for 8 of the accused. As Gina was taken back into custody, Caroline was 8 months pregnant.
And the main thing he wanted was to be present at the birth of the baby. And that was the thing that really upset him. In fact, the afternoon before their bail was revoked, we went shopping and he bought all these teddy bears and clothes for the baby. So I think also he knew in his heart of hearts that maybe he was going to be convicted.
Once convicted, Gina, Mos, Tom, Popo and Tera, the so-called Delmas 5, were held at Pretoria Prison. For Trina, it was a particularly anxious time as he desperately wanted to see and hold his newborn baby before being shipped to Robben Island.
We knew more or less when the baby would come, and the longer I stayed in Pretoria, the more hopeful I became that I would see the baby before going to Robben Island.
I came out of the hospital on the Sunday, and I knew that he was desperate to see the child and to hold the baby. So on the Monday, I made an appointment with the prison. At that stage, they were still at Pretoria Central. And they told us that it would be difficult that Monday, but I should come on the Tuesday. So I went on the Tuesday, and when I arrived on the Tuesday, they told us that they'd moved him to Robben Island at 5 o'clock that morning. So I was incredibly upset.
Undaunted, Caroline decided there and then that the only thing to do was to organize a client-attorney visit to Trina on the island, taking little one-week-old Lindiwe with her.
So when she was 9 days old, he did manage to see her, and he did manage to hold her. And it was an incredible sense of relief once I'd done that. I thought, well, now he's done that. At least when he comes out of prison, it won't be a situation of never having held his baby. As I knew thereafter that she'd have to go and have family visits, and that's behind the glass.
For the first time, I had the opportunity of seeing Lindiwe when I was already on Robben Island during this legal consultation. It was the first time that I could hold her, pass her on to the other 4 comrades. It was very emotional for me. I don't remember how much of the consultation I contributed to because all my attention was on this new baby.
With the trial now over, the defense team worked feverishly on the appeal, which hinged on a mere legal technicality. Early in the trial, Judge Kees van Dijkhorst had accused one of the 2 assessors, Professor Willem Joubert, of liberal bias. Without recourse, the judge then dismissed Professor Joubert. It was on this technicality that the outcome of the appeal depended. It was now January 1989. The hearing was set for Bloemfontein Supreme Court, the 27th of November later that year. As with Popo and Moss, Terra Lakota had been denied bail for the entire 5-year period since his arrest. He was now facing a further 12-year sentence. This was not his first encounter with Robben Island. From 1975, he had served 6 years after conviction in the so-named Sasso trials. At the time, children of political prisoners were only allowed to visit the island up to the age of 3. Thereafter, they had to wait until they turned 16. It was out of deep concern for this forced separation of political prisoners from their children that Terra began writing his book, Prison Letters to a Daughter, as a way of communicating with his daughter, Masichaba.
In the circumstances, you can imagine the gap that would be there, that children would not know their parents. And it was a source of deep concern on the part of many prisoners that these children might be alienated from our generation. And so we had to find various ways to communicate with them, to make them understand that in spite of the road we had chosen to take, in spite of prioritizing the struggle, they must not understand that they are worth nothing and that they are not valuable. But even more important, that we should find a way to share with them some of the elements of why the struggle was important and why they themselves should embrace it. As I said to her in one of the early letters, you must share this with your friends, and most important, with those who will grow up clutching the hems of your skirts, her own children. Of course, it's history that my daughter, of course, passed on herself.
Tragically, Masichaba died in her late teens. At home with her younger brother, Kotane, in 1990, with Terra away serving his second term on the island, Masichaba spoke of her deep admiration for her father and his dedication to the struggle.
keeps on doing it, doesn't get tired. He knows what happened inside the jail, but it doesn't matter to him as long as he's fighting, and he's never given up. Though he knows it's hard to leave us as a family alone, but then he goes on fighting. I think he is a hero.
For Barbara Mantata, her visits to Tom brought back dark memories. Her father, Philip Matthews, was sentenced at the historic Rivonia trial to 12 years on Robben Island in 1963. From age 16, traveling with her mother Rebecca, Barbara once a year visited her father. Now, 15 years later, she would visit her husband, Tom. The child age law had since changed, and she was able to bring Kumo and Fenya, aged 13 and 9 at the time.
It was a very bumpy ride, and because we were black, we weren't allowed to go inside the ship and sit inside. And that was only for white people. And it was sad because, you know, there was a point I remember where we were going and I was quite feeling seasick. And I was always asking my mom, can I go and sit down, you know? And she was like, hold on, everything's okay, we'll get there, you know?
I really hated the trip. I mean, it was long. It was, goodness, it was mean as well, you know? The sea was just, I think it was the first time I had an encounter with the sea, and going there on that little ferry, and goodness, the waves, and then eventually getting there and just being subjected to speaking to him behind a glass pane. It was just really, and it was so impersonal. I mean, I was asking stuff like, are you okay? And you know, as a kid, I was very withdrawn because I couldn't pour out my emotions there because it was just so impersonal, and the time was limited, and there were these prison guards walking up and down, and I just couldn't bring it to myself to be able to just really pour out and speak genuinely and just say, what's going on? You know, what are you doing here? When are you coming back?
Those memories again came back to one. Strong memories of your visits when you were the age of 16, when you started visiting Robben Island, when I first visited my father. And looking at the prison, looking at the walls, looking at all sorts of things and saying, oh, this is where we used to come. And there it's happening again. It was really something remarkable for me. And that I shared with my children. I shared it with my children and I said, this is what I used to do with Granny. We used to come here. Every December we knew this is what, so it clearly is going to be the same thing that Mommy had to experience as a young kid. And I managed, I coped with this. Clearly they were hurting inside. And all you could do was just to support and say, it's not that bad. He's alive, he's here, we can talk to him. Others don't have their daddies anymore.
I never liked the way they kept us. They kept us in a room, like a very small room. And the place was not so nice. And the toilets had no toilet papers, or the weird toilets. It's horrible, but I liked visiting Daddy and speaking to him and all that stuff.
I was very excited when I say, and I was very happy because it was a long time. But then I'd really forgotten his facial looks because he had gained a bit more. And it was like I was very happy to be with him, and I just wished I could be with him forever.
But as time went on, it was becoming clear that there is a good chance that they will win the appeal. And of course, that was a bonus. But again, you learned to restrain yourself and say, you know, hold on. Because the last thing you ever want is to break, and having to break in front of your children. So you needed to be strong. For him, your husband inside, for the children and for yourself.
I can only think what she felt, you know. I can't actually say, you know, but she had to have been very strong. yeah, it must have been hard, yeah.
On the 27th of November 1989, the appeal was heard in the Bloemfontein Supreme Court. In support of their 5 comrades on the island, the 17 acquitted made the journey with family and friends to Bloemfontein.
It is certainly a very important development in the hearing of the case as a whole. It would be a shattering thing if a whole trial, which lasted about 4 years, had to turn the end on a simple point of law, whether the assessor was or was not rightly dismissed. I will feel that I've been vindicated because I feel most unhappy about the procedure adopted in this case. I felt it was unkind, unfair, and my position was that it was defamatory of myself and, I must add, of the senior counsel for the defense.
It was a fatal mistake. And also it hurt Professor Joubert.
On the 15th of December 1989, Professor Willem Joubert was vindicated. The appeal was successfully upheld, and quite incredibly, the entire proceedings of the 3.5-year Delmas Treason Trial were dismissed.
15th of December 1989. Judgment was handed down on that day. I was really taken by surprise.
I was on the tennis court playing tennis, and suddenly these comrades rushed to me and picked me up and told me I was going home, and they held me shoulder high out of the tennis courts into the courtyard, and there was noise in other cells, and Popo, Terra, and Moss, and Tom and Tata were also being carried to our cells to pack.
It came so quickly, so suddenly, that it didn't even give us time to really say goodbye to a number of our comrades and so on. But it was great.
And when we got to the waterfront, I still pinched myself to really, believe that, we were going on our way going home.
All I could see on television was at the airport, the excitement, and here with these guys with their green suits, prison suits out, and my children being part of the crowd, young as they were. Huitsi was actually being held right up there.
I don't know where we were, but I know that Desmond Tutu's wife was carrying me, and I was crying, and there were just all these people. It's a very vivid memory. I can't remember exactly. I don't know what was going on, but yeah.
When they came in, there was just joy, Everybody was chanting slogans, everybody was happy, and I was just so happy to see him. And they were carried, like shoulder high, and we were just celebrating.
It was a joyous moment indeed for all of us. And then there was my little Tina with her mother and my lawyer Priscilla Jana, and there were songs there, people singing, carrying us high up on their shoulders. It was really a great hero's welcome. It was great. It was marvelous.
I saw Caroline and the baby, and for some reason she got into an altercation with one of the police, and she was arrested for allegedly assaulting one of them.
And I was arrested. That's right. I got arrested for kicking a white policeman in the balls. It was a high for the whole country. It wasn't just a high for me personally. It was just part of this role, this new political era that South Africa was entering.
It was a feeling of elation. You felt justified for what you have done. You regretted the wasted effort. You regretted the punishment that they served on Robben Island. You can't stop believing in the judiciary. He says, criticize it, destroy it if you will, but never stopped believing in it. We were accused by purists that by doing these political trials we were lending legitimacy to the apartheid regime. I said, you know, I will stop acting for people in political trials when they or their mothers or their fathers or their sisters or their brothers stop asking me to do it. I don't think they can afford the intellectual heights that you are walking on. They are holding the knife by the sharp edge, and I think we must respect their decision.
After the trial, the Mantata family spent 4 years in the UK. There, as a family unit, they were able to successfully reconcile Khwetsi's feelings of estrangement towards Tom. Back in South Africa, Tom was appointed to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and is currently serving a second term with the Human Rights Commission. Father Jeff Mosalani occasionally visits his old parish, St. Cyprian's Anglican Church in Sharpeville. Continuing his service to the community, he is now chaplain ministering to the inmates of Sun City Prison in Johannesburg. Gina and Caroline were married in May 1990 and today have 3 daughters, Lindiwe, Zaria and Zanella. Gina studied law and has his own legal practice.
Well, Lindy, certainly like any other South African teenager, probably with a slightly better developed social conscience, but certainly, I suppose you just get bored with your parents saying, well, in my day, this is how things were. You are very lucky.
I think I'm just like any other South African kid. Obviously, I have more insight because of my parents, but I mean, I don't think that makes me any different. Maybe a little bit more understanding to the situation, but, you know, pretty much I'm just a normal kid.
I feel fulfilled. There was a time when the future looked bleak, and I had lost hope that my ambitions of achieving anything in life would be fulfilled. But I am now a professional person. I have 3 children whose future I'm very positive about. I think they would live very fulfilling lives. I think I'm a very fortunate person and I'm happy with my life.
Sadly, Simon and Cordy passed away after a long fight with HIV/AIDS in December 1998. One of many casualties of the struggle, a marriage made in Delmas, Lazarus and Golda are no longer together.
That marriage never worked. And yes, I sometimes blame myself in the following manners, that it's unfortunate that we men, or we politicians, we tend to, to marry the struggle rather than, marrying the loved ones.
Since democracy in South Africa, Popo Molefe has served 2 successful terms as Premier of the Northwest Province. Regrettably, his marriage fell victim to the strain of the trial. His son Puso has come through the difficult times well and has a close relationship with his father. Popo's daughter Tina, who was 1 month old when Popo was detained and taken away, has been nurtured and brought up by his attorney, Priscilla Jana. As a gesture of reconciliation, Popo held a reunion for all involved with the Delmas Treason Trial. It was also an occasion to thank the South African Council of Churches for their unflagging support given to all during the trial. Judge van Dijkhorst accepted his invitation and even made a speech.
At the time we saw each other, we did not hear each other, and because we did not hear each other, and especially from our side, because we did not hear, we became indifferent. And having become indifferent, we lived in 2 entirely separate worlds.
Veteran human rights advocate George Bizos continues to answer the call where needed. Recently, he defended opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai facing treason charges in Zimbabwe. Terra Licata was appointed Minister of Defense and lives with his wife and family in Bloemfontein.
There's nothing to compare with the joy of concluding a struggle successful, of reaching a day you can say, our people are free. There can be no substitute for this. The greatest single reward, whatever life might give or not give tomorrow, the pain, the tears, the blood, all of it cannot downplay the value of freedom.
I think it was a very important era. I wouldn't have the opportunities I have now if what occurred didn't occur. And for that, I think it was a very important era, and it was something that had to be done, and I respect my father for that.